If you're looking for visionary conversations that push the boundaries of everything you thought you knew, welcome to Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge, where every month, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer invites two leading authorities from distinctly different fields to engage in a deep dialogue focusing on the latest discoveries, information, and insights on some of today's most provocative metaphysical topics. Here's your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello, welcome to part one of this month's Conversation Beyond the Cutting Edge. Joining me today to share their latest research, revelations, and insights on ETs, UFOs, consciousness, the origins, history, and the future of the human race, and a good deal more, are writer, author, teacher, and consciousness researcher Penny Kelly, and former church doctor, theological educator, and Anglican archdeacon turned paleocontact researcher, expert, and author of the best-selling Eden series of books, Paul Anthony Wallis. Penny Kelly, Paul Wallis, welcome.
Good day.
Welcome to you. It's good to be here.
So I'm going to start with you, Penny. Last year, you publicly revealed that you've had many experiences of who you are, where you've come from, past lives, missions, and what you're doing here. And that understanding came experientially through the Kundalini awakening you had some decades ago. What I want to know is, why did it take you so long to talk about your galactic lineage and mission?
Oh, well, part of it was because I was part of the mission was to stay under the radar until told to, okay, it's safe. It was not safe earlier. The point blank message was, stay under the radar. You'll be taken out if you don't.
And do you think it's safe now?
Not really, but when I asked that same question, they said to me, they being the deep state, they're too tangled up in their own efforts to survive to bother with somebody that they view as just a beginner. They've taken out a lot of people along the way or compromised a lot of others. So it was really important that not until the crisis was almost upon us, and that was 2018, when they came back and said, okay, speak up now. And then again last year, they said, tell it all. I was like, bah. So I started telling more and more. My family knew, but nobody else did.
Paul, when you first embarked on this path of research, you didn't have any idea that the few odd experiences you'd had in childhood were a form of contact. At what point did that become clear to you?
Oh, well, you're quite right. It was after I'd published my first book in paleocontact, which was Escaping from Eden, that I began to connect the dots. And when I published Escaping from Eden, I started to be contacted by people who were contactees and experiencers who needed to tell their stories, because there's such a ridicule factor and a taboo around these experiences. They couldn't find anyone in their friendship circle or family that they could share these experiences with, some of which were decades old. And so when they saw that I'd put out Escaping from Eden, they thought, I can talk to Paul, or maybe they saw me on The Fifth Kind. Maybe I can tell him. And before people were willing to share their own stories with me, they would ask, Paul, have you ever experienced a close encounter? Because they wanted to know if I was really a safe person for them to share their experience. And initially my answer was, no, I haven't personally, but I have many friends who have. And that was enough for most people to begin to share their experiences. But after I heard a few of these stories, I began thinking, wait a minute, what you're telling me, I've had that experience. That happened to me when I was 20. And I began to realize that I did, in fact, have 5 experiences when I was 20 years old that at the time I tried to process within an evangelical Christian worldview. And so back at that time, everything in the universe had to fit into certain boxes for me. It was either God, the devil, angels, demons, human, animal, vegetable, mineral, or it didn't exist, or you shouldn't talk about it. And so the frightening experiences I'd had, well, perhaps I should tick the demonic box. And the elevating experiences, well, nothing really fits, but I'll put angelic. And that was how I processed those experiences. But I always knew that was off. And the more theology I studied and the better I got to know the Bible, the more I realized those were not the right explanations of what had happened. So I was already in the path of speaking on paleocontact and writing books about paleocontact before I realized, yes, I probably was a contactee myself. And it's in the second book, The Scars of Eden, that I talk about that realization and share some of my experiences, which are not dramatic Whitley Strieber, Travis Walton type experiences. They're very, what's this a story about? What did happen? They're stories that don't prove anything, where I can remember the beginning of what happened, but not the end. But I share those to encourage others who've had that kind of, not sure what that was kind of experience, to share their own testimony, because I think the more permission we can give to one another to share our own stories, the more rapidly we're going to realize we've got company.
We are company.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
So you didn't have any memory, though, of a previous life, you know, your galactic origins?
No. Sorry, you're asking me or Penny?
You. Sorry, Paul. You.
No, I haven't. Although looking back, I wonder, because from a very, very young age, I seemed to have an awareness that I needed to play a long game in this life. And from being about 5 years old, I was always very fascinated by people who went on to make significant contributions later in life. And I'm not sure where that knowledge came from. And I think it might have been a pre-incarnation conversation that I was sat down for. But in terms of actual memories, no, I don't have memories of a previous life.
It's interesting because, you know, your previous career is the perfect training in a way for what you're doing now. But Penny, yours wasn't.
No, and there was a reason for that. Actually, the how would I call it, the pre-planning for me to come here as part of this mission was involved. It was extensive. It was every single detail had to be considered and practiced for. I was told at the beginning, right after Kundalini, you enter into a state where you know everything. That lasted for about 3 years, everything, and it's a very disturbing state. But in that time, I could remember every detail of all of that training, and the big thing was, we want you to go down to become human, to experience the religion, the education, the simple life. There was quite a bit of emphasis and time spent on choosing my parents, which I wrote about a little bit at the end of Robes, a book of coming changes. But that the goal was, you know, you're going to have to hang in there until the waking up process begins, till what Paul calls the transformation, where you wake up to all your gifts, and they are extensive. But what you get in that early stage of not knowing is a really good education in what does the average human have to overcome in order to step into their real self, their full potential, their, you know, to really become comfortable with that transformation process and the end result of that, which is a new human. So that was the reason for the not knowing until Kundalini happened, and then then that is such a tremendous change to happen all at once. Very few people, actually, I had a really good compliment from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi years and years ago. I had written the Evolving Human, and one of my students was a student of Maharishi in Iowa, Fairfield, Iowa. And he was evidently saying to them, you can't make it through Kundalini without a guru. You have to have a guide. So she took him my book, and he read it and said to her, she's already a master. She would never have done this without having that mastery behind her. And right at the time, I was really struggling. And so that was a very helpful, very powerful message. And I thought, well, how does a master behave? Doesn't freak out every other minute. So it was a very good message for me. So it's quite a change.
Penny, can I ask you about your Kundalini awakening?
Yeah.
Plato talks about the Kundalini awakening as an experience of moving out of a situation where you've only seen the shadows of reality, and then all of a sudden you're actually looking at the light that makes the shadows. You're looking at the real causality. You understand exactly what's what. You know everything, to use that language.
Yeah.
But then if you're going to remain in the world and be a thought leader, you have to go back in to the cave where everyone's only looking at the shadows. And if you talk about your experience, people will think you're crazy. Was that your experience as well? When you went back in or came out of the Kundalini, did you forget what you knew before when you knew everything? Or did you have the experience of people thinking, what on earth has happened to Penny?
Well, I did have that experience. Oh my, it was really disturbing. There was no one to talk to. There were no gurus living in the Detroit, Michigan area. And furthermore, I was not interested in gurus or anything of that nature. I was a staunch Catholic. That was all part of the whole upbringing. When I went after Kundalini, I was struggling terribly for several years, 3 years, just to figure out what happened to me, because I didn't know what it was. And then little by little, you piece it together. I was just like a dog with a bone. I couldn't do anything. You don't sleep after Kundalini. When consciousness is awake all the time. And so I would put myself to bed, and the next morning I would get up having not slept all night and have had all kinds of experiences. And that left me really tired. And I was too tired to play the games in the cave, so to speak. The result was, after about 3 years, I discovered that the reason I was exhausted was because I didn't know how to maintain inner silence. As soon as I maintained that inner silence, now I could see and hear the entire game. And little by little, I learned that if somebody doesn't ask, I don't tell. And so that's really how I moved forward. Eventually, I started teaching, and I found a few people here and there who were just didn't have Kundalini, but they were very, very desperate to talk to somebody about the whole spiritual awakening process. And they were going through what I was going through, and what I just finished reading, Echoes of Eden, and I was chuckling at your conversations with Brad. And, today I was thinking, well, too bad we're going to do this online. Otherwise, I'd offer him a beer and say, Paul, do you need another drink? So it really was a period of time where, when I started teaching, I really don't think I knew what I was doing. I was just desperate for somebody to talk to. And that, by teaching, I started learning. And I never quit. Then I got involved in research. I wrote my thesis on education of consciousness. And that, I've just never stopped researching, studying. And I have figured out why they can't get anywhere studying consciousness. It's because they don't know how. And you can study it. But the cave, Little by little, over the past 45 years, there has been a huge change in the awareness and the freedom to talk, but I'm still very circumspect about what I will say in company that I don't know. I wait to hear, and I watch and I listen, and I hear and see a lot. Um, People often say to me, "How did you see that?" or "How did you notice that?" Because I'm paying attention, and that's really all it is.
But there's definitely a sense of quickening. Everything is accelerating all of a sudden. I mean, Paul, you've said that you believe it's crucial that we all know that we've existed before in this material life and very likely in other places. Penny, your mission seems to be to teach the world about the mind and consciousness and help people, through the challenges of moving from 3D consciousness. Why is it all quickening now?
When people get big stress, which we have big stress everywhere, they start reaching out for new answers. And then out comes my books and Paul's books and other people and the internet. And now all of a sudden that information is out there if you're needing to go look for it. And once you know, you can't go back. You can't unknow. So the quickening process, every so often I think, wow, I'm just not teaching fast enough. And then other days I think, well, okay, the people that I'm working with seem to be increasing in number. That then figure that each one of those is in touch with at least 10 other people. And I've taught thousands over the last 45 years. So it begins to creep through the consciousness all around the planet. And we have others, that people from elsewhere that are working to help wake up that process. I've said in other presentations that the most important thing from our point of view is DNA. That is really the secret pattern of a particular kind of life on a planet. And this DNA, yours, Paul's, mine, our children, our families, those patterns of DNA are incredibly precious. And so the beings who are here watching us, and you also have to understand the cycle. What is the nature of reality? It's a cycle. But the beings watching us want us to make this shift. And that's getting a lot of help there. So fingers crossed, I think we're going to make it just fine.
Seems to be moving so fast that we actually don't have time for Kundalini awakenings now.
No, the awakening is slow.
It takes too long to get over.
I'd like to echo what Penny said about this acceleration, because I'm finding through my contact with people, through my work, that there's an amazing waking up that's happening among people of every age and generation. People who correspond with me or who've come to me for coaching or workshops are people from their 20s up until their 90s. And they're saying to me, my worldview has gone through a revolution in the last few years. I no longer believe the things I've believed all my life, and I've got an appetite on me to work out what's really going on, what's really real, what's the truth of who we are, our origins, our potential, our destiny. And that's why I want to be in this conversation. And for me, I have not seen that level of appetite right across the ages in my life before. I think this is something new that's happening, this buying out of old paradigms and an appetite for a new paradigm. I think it is connected with lots of nuts and bolts things. I think the recent international health emergency actually helped a lot of people to follow their curiosity and realize things were not as they thought. I think the internet and access to information allows people who've had experiences to find other people who've had similar experiences in a way that wasn't possible in decades past. And again, that turbocharges people's own personal research. But I think there are other elements to it as well. I wonder if we have more company now than we've had in the past, is one
Yes.
piece of the puzzle. And another piece of the puzzle is when I was involved in hospitality-based ministry and leading people on retreats, I discovered that there are these places that we might call thin places, which is when you are in those places, those locations, they might be natural locations or built structures. It's as if the veil between our usual perceptual field and another dimension is thinner. And you begin to experience things that are from beyond, or see and hear things that are from beyond. And we call those thin places. And our ancestors understood these places and considered them sacred. Well, I wonder if, just as we have thin places in North America or in Australia or in the UK, I wonder if our planet is in a thin place right now. I wonder if our solar system has moved into a region of space that's a thin place. I wonder if the Milky Way has rotated to a certain location where more interdimensional experience is going to be had by any conscious life. And it's just a theory, but I'm beginning to suspect that it really is that global. It really is that cosmic an experience that we're having. That's why people of every type, age, generation are having these transpersonal experiences at a rate that I don't think we've seen for a very long time.
That's interesting, because I don't know who I was talking to recently, but somebody, and they were talking about the Earth itself is evolving just as we are. It's expanding, and therefore you can't, draw a line between the two. As the Earth evolves, we evolve, and vice versa. And therefore, this, if some of us are seeing or experiencing portals, the Earth must be too.
Oh, I agree with that. And 2,500 years ago, Plato put forward the idea that we should regard the Earth as a living organism of which we are all part. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in seeing things that way.
I have to second that all the way. And I would like to add something to the thought bin, if I could. There's a lot of talk, and I think you mentioned it too, Paul, about somewhere along the line we lost some capacities. And the argument is often that we were dumbed down. And I have much more interest in science, and where I come from, I am a scientist. And so there's what I think, what I would like people to understand is that, yeah, we have lost some capacities. When you have a big cataclysm called a micronova, it's not a nova, it's not a big nova, but it's a micronova, and it causes quite a bit of disastrous results on the planet. But what you get is this blast of high frequency energy coming from the sun. And at that moment, that is very much like a Kundalini experience. Kundalini is actually just a huge acceleration of electromagnetic energies moving through the body in a pulsed form, pulling everything into a new formation, all of your frequencies in new formation. And when and if that sun hits planet Earth and we're all in fear mode, there's not going to be any acceleration or move up in consciousness. There's going to be a move down. And we're headed toward what I think is another cataclysm somewhere in the next couple of decades, if not in the next few years. And I would really like people to have in their mind that that's the moment when you want to be totally centered in yourself and intending that you're going to take that energy, let it move through you, and come out with a new kind of consciousness on the other end, which is exactly what Kundalini does. So that whole story of, yeah, we have lost some capacities. But was that our own fault? Was that a failure to hang on to ourselves at the moment that last cataclysm hit 12,068 years ago? So that we have a big opportunity coming, and that will then give us the oompah to move into fourth and fifth dimensional systems, which have a different kind of consciousness. It's still consciousness, but they choose to use consciousness differently. And
sorry, I just wanted to echo what you just said, Penny. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
If there's going to be an acceleration, just to affirm what you're saying, we need to be very intentional about what's going to be accelerated within ourselves. Right. And so the mental and emotional state in which we live, we need to ask, do I want that heightened? And it relates to traditional wisdom around protocols designed to switch our higher cognitive powers back on. So I'm talking about tea ceremonies, for instance. So Plato did the Kukion ceremony, and people today do tea ceremonies that are very similar. But before you do that, which is designed to heighten your abilities, you have to do a fast. You have to do a fast to cleanse your body of toxins that are pulling you down, and you have to do an emotional and mental fast to make sure you're in a good space before you do that tea ceremony. Otherwise, you're going to have a very bad trip. And I think it's good to scale that picture up.
That's right.
Say, if our planet's moving into a thin place, if we've got more company, if everything's going to be heightened, just make sure that what you're carrying within yourself is what you want heightening.
That's right.
That's a really good point. And we're going to take a break in a minute. When we come back, Penny, I want to talk about, you have said, I mean, here we are at this point of evolving into something bigger, something more. But you also have said that this is the point at which many civilizations have self-destructed.
I know. Yeah.
So it seems like, not everything is smooth sailing here, but we'll talk about that when we get back from the break. So you're listening to Conversations Beyond the Cutting Edge. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest this month are writer, author, teacher, and consciousness researcher Penny Kelly, and former church doctor, theological educator, and archdeacon turned paleocontact researcher Paul Anthony Wallis. And we're discussing ETs, UFOs, and the origins and the future of the human race. We'll be back with more after this break.
Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy, and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Paul Wallis, Penny Kelly, you can both jump in here. This point about reaching a point where many civilizations have failed and self-destructed. What does this cataclysm and the 12,000 year cycle have to do with that? Is one creating the other, or are these just, 2 things that happen to coincide?
I think I'll answer first, Paul. You can come in at any time. But what I've seen in other cataclysms is that people were not ready. And then when the micronova is when the sun, some people call it a flash. Some people say it's a solar sneeze. Some suns nova every 10 or 12 or 20 years. Ours doesn't. It's every 12,000 years. And so it makes it possible for civilizations to grow and become quite extensive and quite evolved. But essentially what that means is we have 12,000 years to learn to get off the planet with our technology, or to evolve ourselves to the point where consciousness returns to managing, I'm going to say, the atmosphere and the weather. And that's the solar weather, space weather as well. And when we don't rise to that challenge, we go down. A micronova is a pretty serious thing in which a slice of the planet burns up. The impact of that it blows away the atmosphere on one side of the planet, and the result is that the atmosphere on the rest of the planet flows hundreds of miles an hour around to fill in where the atmosphere was blown away, and that causes high winds, 200-300 mile per hour winds, and then when you have that kind of decompression, you have cooling, severe cooling. And then there's wave action, because usually micronova stops the planet spin for just a moment. So most people don't even know that it was customary for people, before the Christians came along, people managed the weather in their little area. And that was when they were told they couldn't look at the sky anymore, and it was forbidden to do any astrology or anything related to that. Their response was, but things aren't going to work well. The planet, the weather is not going to, we need to be in touch with the weather And anybody who did those kinds of things was just put away, just executed. So we're at a point where we're kind of languishing in ignorance around that whole thing. We haven't gotten to the point where we even can believe that we could have an impact on the sun. But when you have, and this is a message that I got from my people like 25 years ago, you're going to need these 8 billion, 9 billion consciousnesses all in alignment in order to counter and soften that experience with the sun. And I, at the time, was like, there's no way. And now I'm looking at it saying, well, maybe. Why not? Why not? We don't know because we don't try anything. People need to begin trying. They need to begin experimenting, exploring. There have been plenty of times when I have stopped the rain or brought the rain or had other miraculous kinds of things happen. Why? Just because I try. Because I'm one of those kids that says, what happens when you do this? What happens when you say that? So,
Paul, what's your response to that? I mean, I know that one of the things that Penny said about cataclysms is that people will go into the earth, that in fact that's where our ancestors lived. I mean, you've visited a lot of megalithic sites. You've been around the world. Have you seen evidence of that?
Yes, there is evidence around the world of quite large populations having lived underground in ancient times, and Turkey is the place to go for the most extensive examples of that. And so you have to wonder, well, what was happening on the planet's surface that moved human beings to construct these really developed underground sites to accommodate thousands and thousands of human beings? I've come into this research through the study of ancient texts. So I began in the Bible, going to the root meanings of key words and finding a layer of story emerging that I wasn't familiar with, and then realizing that the layer of story that had emerged repeats in the ancestral narratives of cultures all around the world. And very often the points that repeat are memories of cataclysms, memories of traumas in the human story. And having made that journey, I've gone back to the Bible and realized that by the time you finish reading the stories of beginnings in the first 12 chapters of Genesis, you've probably read about 5 planetary resets, reboots of civilization on planet Earth. You may be reading about timelines that precede everything we know about Homo sapiens. And these reboots are caused by events that have impacted the entire planet.
Yeah.
Again, Plato was onto this 2,500 years ago, and he said every few thousand years, something would happen that would take civilization on Earth back to a virtual zero. And he wasn't sure what the something was, but he said it has to do with the movement of objects in space, which is vague enough that it could refer to the capture of a moon, could refer to a comet strike, could refer to the sun doing something unusual, or some realignment happening in the solar system. It could be any and all of those things. And certainly there's evidence at megalithic sites around the world of phenomenally high temperatures that have vitrified and melted very dense rock. And you look at that and you think, well, that's not a lightning strike. That's not magma has flowed through this area. That is a solar event that we're looking at that would do something like this. And so I'm with what Penny is saying. I think the sun and the cycles of the sun do play a role in the history of the planet and therefore in the history of civilization on Earth. And I think there are other causations as well. I think we have had comet strikes that have been very impacting, to use that word, in terms of rebooting even life on Earth, not just civilization. So if you look, for instance, at the evidence for the Clovis comet, in North America, you're looking at the extinction of 70% of the megafauna on that continent. That's not just human civilization impacted, that's life itself.
Yeah.
I mean, these cataclysms, are they natural events caused by whatever, cyclical in nature, or are they something that we have created?
I think they're cyclical. I don't know how we think with a grand lifespan of 75 or 85 years that we understand the cycles of a planet that's 4 billion years old. I think that's a little bit on the arrogant side. And I think we could be a lot more humble. The secrets for all of the technology to get off the planet are buried in Mother Nature. And when I was a child, we didn't have a TV and we were poor. And so I spent most of my time running outside barefoot through the fields, through the woods, just observing, just watching. And you begin to understand so many things that you don't have the language for. You understand how dirt moves when, when your sand pile gets too tall or too big. You understand how water moves based on the lay of the land and the tilt and all of that. You understand so many things about trees, about bugs. It's unlimited. And in those secrets of energy are what I'm going to call the extensions into how do we utilize energy in such a way that we can develop a mothership, for instance, or develop something else. You understand, I've taught classes for gifted children, and I was stunned at how brilliant they were just fiddling with magnets. And I learned some things watching them. So if you're a good observer, what you begin to understand is that a lot of the secrets of the world are hidden in Mother Nature. Water at 4 degrees centigrade is at its most dense. It'll float stones. Nobody knows that. There's so much about Mother Nature we don't know. And when you look at the planet and ask, how is that thing floating there with a waistline of 24,000 miles? How is that floating in midair? Why doesn't she fall? So it's because of fields of force, magnetic fields. And then you study plasma. And then you see how plasma works, and you begin to understand, and the knowledge begins to compound.
But if you know about this, if you know they're in the history books, then the governments must know about this.
Absolutely,
they must know that we are, and so must our galactic brethren. Must also know about it.
Yes.
Why is nobody doing anything to change?
Paul, I think you should answer that, because I was going to say one of the things that I just finished reading Echoes, and I was looking at the list you have toward the end of the book, all of the things that have been suppressed, right on down the line. There's like 10 things. They're not accidental. There's a takeover that is in progress here on the planet. It's been going on for hundreds of years. It's a long, slow program. And you just laid out the efforts that they've made to make sure that we cannot come to our power and they can have the planet.
Who can have the planet, and what are they going to do with it?
I don't know I do know some of the things they're going to do with it. So
what
but
do you
it's
know,
not
Paul?
good news.
Well, ancestral narratives all around the world speak about a power struggle in terms of managing Project Earth and the direction that our overseers want things to take. And I think in every age, whether you're looking at the human layer of governance or the ET layer of planetary governance, there's never agreement. There's always a faction that would like to take it in this direction, where humans just need to be managed, thank you very much, so that we can exploit the planet for our interests. And then there's another faction who loves human beings and says, no, they're worth so much more than this. And in fact, they're ready to go to the next level. There's always this push and pull of agendas, and it reflects in the conflicts on the El Ba'adat, the Council of Powers in the Old Testament, the wars among the gods in the Norse and Vedic stories, for instance. It really is a global story that there's this push and pull of which way is humanity going to go, which way is it going to be taken. I share Penny's hopefulness that those who are here to help us have the upper hand. I think if that weren't the case, our present reality would be far worse than it is. I don't think the future is set in stone, though. And I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier about, well, what is the energy of the planet? What is the energy of us as a species? How emotionally intelligent are we? Are we ready to go to a new level that's positive, or are we going to stay in a funk or have our funk heightened? So I think we're not powerless in this equation. I think we have helpers. I think we've always had helpers, but we need to help ourselves as well in terms of our mental and emotional state. And that's what I derive from ancestral story. It's not because I have a gift for predicting the future, but I think that is the message. That's the take-home message that our ancestors wanted to leave us with from the stories they bequeathed to us, that our decisions are significant, that we need to be as conscious and intelligent as we can possibly be, so that our contribution to these decisions is going to be a positive one and is going to push Project Earth and Project Humanity in a direction that means a better human experience.
What role do today's children have in all of this?
Oh, well, I think I look on my kids as an upgrade to my generation. And I find, as many parents do, that young kids have prodigious cognitive abilities. So I will just give a simple couple of, for instances, from my own family. One of my boys, when he was 5 years old, we noticed that he had an ability to download thought from the field around him. And the way this would manifest is I'd be, say, in the kitchen, and I'd be thinking some very adult thought about, say, getting the second car serviced within the next week. And then all of a sudden, my 5-year-old would speak my thought out loud. So it is not a 5-year-old thought to say we need to get the second car serviced by the end of next week, but he would speak it because he just downloaded it from the field. So I began noticing he's got an ability that's way advanced of anything I've been able to develop, and he's got it at 5 years old. I want to encourage that. And so we've always encouraged our kids to listen. We call it their subby, short for subconscious. And so if one of them comes to us with a mathematical question, I'm not sure about the answer here, our habit has been to say, well, what does subby say? Well, subby says the answer is 39.5. Bingo, that is the answer.
Oh, wow.
So their subby knew, but they hadn't been able to catch up in their linear thinking to be able to work out how they knew and how to argue for it. So that's a little, for instance. And then another one, just to tie it in with other themes here, I remember going up to my daughter's bedroom one evening just to tuck her in, make sure she was ready to sleep. And she said to me, she was 11 years old at the time, she said, I could imagine, she said, that there are beings from another planet who are hovering over our suburb at the moment, observing us, and they're laughing at us. And I said, oh, why are they laughing at us? They're laughing at us because we all live on the surface instead of under the surface. And they're laughing at us because everything we use is stuck to the ground because we haven't been able to master gravity.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, whoa, this doesn't sound like an 11-year-old thought. And so I said, yeah, I can imagine that too. And then I said, of course, it's possible that that is actually happening. And she said, yes, I thought that too. And I thought, oh, okay. That's what I thought. You've picked up on something that is happening.
Yeah.
But she didn't quite have the courage to say, Daddy, I think this is happening right now. Somehow I picked it up. She said, I can imagine. And then when I said it could be real, she said, yes, I think that. So this level of awareness and this ability to download information really is prodigious. It is beyond anything I've been able to nurture myself. And so I try to nurture it in my kids. And I think if we can have that attentive approach to our children, we're going to see an upgrade. If we can keep kids knowing how to keep their theta state going in waking life, they're going to do far better than we've done. And so I think the potential for an awakening accelerating from one generation to the next is very great if we're willing to really nurture the natural skills that our children already have.
Well, of course, there are people who say that these children, they are our galactic brethren. Many of them have not been here before. And so are they coming here to help us, with this cataclysm, or change our consciousness in some way?
Let me say something that kind of builds on something that Paul said in his book that I thought was very interesting. I mentioned earlier that life is a cycle, and we have this source, this Godhead, this whatever you want to call it, this amazing source of life. And we get born into a system, and we grow up, and we mature, and then we die. But we've usually left children and often grandchildren, and we don't really die. We just pass to the next world, which is not a physical world. And we hang around and try, how we all try to make life better for our children? Well, when we pass to the next world, we end up going back to work with the people in the family that we think we can have a good impact on telepathically, somebody who might listen, etc., or we watch over them. And in that way, you pass to the next world and you kind of keep on nurturing the adults who are still here while the adults are still nurturing the children. And little by little, there's an evolutionary staircase that we move up and become just more and more powerful until eventually we return to the God state, and then it starts over again. It's almost like a recycling process, but in the process, we have this magnificent opportunity to enjoy life, the excitement, the creativity, the music, the smells, the taste, the lovers, the dance, all the stuff that we have. And right now we're not really enjoying very much, but we could. And that, Paul said in the book that there are, how did you put that, Paul? Something about there's a crowd of people surrounding those who are still alive. The ancestors are still hanging around. That could not be a more accurate statement.
I love this idea that generations who've preceded us are actually hanging around to support us and encourage our progress through life. And I believe it to be true. It's actually there in the New Testament as well, largely overlooked and forgotten by mainstream Christianity, but people experience it. And I had a friend years ago who, she had an evangelical Christian faith, but was experiencing something that didn't quite go with that theology. Yeah. She had experienced at some deep level a sensation of being helped and protected and nurtured by a grandfather that she had never known. I think the grandfather had known her as a baby and had a special connection with her, and then he had died, but she had always felt that he was around supporting her progress through life somehow. And she didn't know how to explain it. And she didn't tell many people, because that's not supposed to happen in evangelical Christianity, except it is there in the New Testament. If you go to the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, talks about this great cloud of witnesses, is the phrase.
The watchers.
And what's interesting about that, the writer says we're surrounded, not preceded by our ancestors. We're surrounded by our ancestors. And he calls them witnesses, which means they are conscious and watching. They're interested in our progress through life, the race that we have to run, and they're there to support our progress. And it ties in with ancestral wisdom around the world. If you go to a Nanga or a Sangoma for a reading or for healing in Southern Africa, they will seek to tune in to the invisible cloud of helpers who've walked in the room with you. And though they're a little agnostic about who exactly these spirits might be, the expectation is that these are your ancestors. And so the healer has to tune in.
I'm sorry, Paul. This is absolutely fascinating. We will continue the conversation in episode 2, but I think you've really hit on something there, but I'm afraid we're almost out of time. I just want to tell our viewers, you need to look at Paul's latest book, The Invasion of Eden. Did our ancestors warn us about ET invasions? And is history repeating itself in the 21st century? And Penny's book, The Revival, Path to a New Earth, New Human. That's it for today. We're out of time, I'm afraid. Paul Wallis, Penny Kelly, thanks for joining us. I look forward to episode 2 of this conversation.
Thanks, Sandie. Likewise.